Hello and welcome to Module 3, P3O Models and Tailoring. Let me take you through the various syllabus areas that we would be covering as a part of this particular module. As part of Level 1 learning, we would be looking into the three different functional areas in which the P3O can provide services. In other words, broadly, all the services that a P3O could provide are classified into three buckets. We're going to look into those three different functional areas. And we're going to look into the different types of offices which a P3O can consist of, specifically permanent or temporary. Remember, we were looking into the thought that one size fits all does not work with organization. We would need to pick and choose a model or a type of office that would suit our organization. And at level 2 learning, we would look into the different strategic planning or portfolio support functions offered within a P3O. We would also examine the different delivery support functions offered within a P3O. And we would look into the different center of excellence functions offered within a P3O. So broadly speaking, the three key functions that P3O could kind of render help on is in the area of strategic planning and portfolio support, in the area of delivery support, and in the area of providing center of excellence services. We would examine these three different types of functional areas as a part of this particular module. We'd also look into the typical factors that may affect the design of the P3O model. We would examine where a P3O should report to in order to add value to the organization. Now, oftentimes in certain organizations, PMOs are not reporting to higher up in the organization, so that would not enable P3O to be empowered, and therefore the right call in terms of to which body or to which governance line within the organization should the P3O report to is an important consideration. And then we would examine the types of P3O models and how they differ for centralized versus decentralized offices. We would examine the characteristics and underlying success factors for a P3O model with an organization portfolio office. We would examine the characteristics and underlying success factors for a P3O model with hub portfolio offices. These are different types of models. We will kind of examine the features of these types of models along with their success factors. A few more syllabus areas that we would cover as a part of level 2. We would examine the characteristics and underlying success factors for a virtual PMO model, for a temporary P3O model, and we would also look into the reasons for and key considerations of distributed models. Oftentimes you see PMOs in different locations, in different, for example, geographical locations or in different business units. So what's the reasoning and what are the key considerations we got to keep in mind when we think about a distributed model? How and why the emphasis of functions and services offered by the different offices in a P3O model can differ. We would look into the need to integrate a P3O model with the wider organization model, the role of the head of P3O in doing so, and the use of embedded resources. It's important to look at P3O not only as an isolated support structure, but it needs to be well integrated into the wider organization. And we would examine the independent P3O assurance services and how they can be delivered. Now, remember, when we were kind of considering the idea about the P3O value matrix, P3O not only provides support in terms of enabling the various projects and program, but it also provides restraining functions. So assurance is a restraining function, provides confidence for the decision makers. We've also examined how P3O governance services align with a wider organization. The role of information assurance and the role of P3O will typically play in supporting it. And we would also look into some non-PPM functions, which are sometimes undertaken by a P3O and why, and the impact that this has on a P3O. An example of a non-PPM function would be providing secretarial function providing, let's say, administrative or travel booking support for the senior management within the organization. And finally, we would conclude with understanding the key drivers and other factors which should be considered when sizing a P3O. So let's start our journey in terms of looking into what are the key considerations in a P3O model. Now, as we kind of looked at earlier on when we were talking about the various syllabus areas, broadly speaking, all of the functions that a P3O offers could be put into three big buckets. P3O can render services or functions within the strategic planning or portfolio support line. In other words, P3O can provide decision support functionalities for the project boards, for the program boards, and for the portfolio boards, and provides important inputs towards strategic planning. The second area where P3O can render help is in providing delivery support for projects, delivery support for programs, helping the project managers and the program managers, let's say, create risk registers, issue registers in project planning, program planning, etc. And finally, P3O can render support within the Center of Excellence. It's all about capability support, designing, developing standards, frameworks, coaching, mentoring project managers are some good examples of Center of Excellence activities. So if they ask you a question in the exam, what are the three functional areas? Please do remember these three elements. Now, what are the design considerations we got to keep in mind when we implement the P3O? Now, we got a few ideas over here. Now, centralized or decentralized, should we kind of have a P3O that is high up in the organization that provides centralized support for all of the business units across the organization, or should we kind of more have a decentralized approach? In other words, you could have one organizational portfolio office, let's say reporting to strategy, and then you could have hub portfolio offices within IT, within engineering projects, things of that nature. That would be an example of a decentralized. So when we design our P3O model, we got to ask the question, are we looking at a centralized design, or are we looking at a decentralized one? Another consideration is, do we like to have a permanent office, or should we have a temporary office? Typically, when we think about projects and program offices, they are usually temporary in nature, and we normally set these offices at the start of the project or program, and we decommission them at the start or at the end of the project or program. So that's another design consideration. Should we kind of have it co-located? In other words, should we kind of have all the P3O staff in one location, or is it okay if we kind of have a distributed model where the P3O staff are distributed in different parts of the country, or if it's a global organization, in different parts of the world? Now, another key consideration is to look into the maturity level of the organization. How mature is the organization, department, program, or project in the context of P3M, in the context of portfolio, program, and project management capabilities? And what is the level of maturity on the people front? Are they skilled enough? Do they have the needed capabilities? Is there a culture of energy? Is there a culture of getting along? Is there a culture of bonding and working together as a common goal? Is there a well-defined set of processes in place? All of these elements would play an important role in choosing the right P3O model. And finally, where does the P3O and its component offices report into is an important aspect of consideration. In order to have a better accountability and greater levels of empowerment within the organization, we would need to choose a right placement in terms of where a P3O would sit within the organization. Let's kind of start off with the first area of consideration, which is the functional areas. Let's kind of examine what are the sub-functions within this broader three buckets that we kind of talked about.